Welcome to the Shevat podcast series, The Power of the Hebrew Months with Rabbi Pill. Each month of the Jewish year carries its own unique energy, a spiritual rhythm woven into creation itself. Our sages teach that the months are not just markers of time, but windows of opportunity, each with its own avoda and pathway for growth. In this monthly series, Rabbi Pill and I will guide you into the flow of sacred time. Together, we'll uncover the spiritual work, the inner energy, and the actions you can take to stay in sync with the month. Tools to lift you to new levels of awareness and growth. Think of it as your spiritual workout routine written into the Torah's calendar. Month by month, we'll train the soul, awaken new strengths, and live more fully in harmony with Hashem's design for time. Join us as we journey through the Hebrew months and discover how to channel the energy of time into lasting personal transformation. It is good to be back here once again for another episode of the Power of the Hebrew Months, and to be joined this time with Rabbi Pill. You know, I have found this series to be so helpful to me. I spent this last Shabbos sitting with my wife, and we were talking about how the last few weeks have brought with it lots of challenges. And I told her what I learned about the month of Teves, what I shared with you last month, and we started to go back and dig beneath the surface and look at where Hashem is orchestrating everything that we have been previously discussing with sighs of exhaustion and tiredness. And as we went and started peeling back the layers and looking for Hashem's hand in all the things what we had previously discussed, and we found them very clearly, it totally elevated the entire conversation and really put us in a sense of joy, warmth, a sense of Hashem is with us. And that would have never happened if I had not started doing this series and learning about the month. So I hope you, my friends, have found it as helpful as I have. If so, I would love to hear from you. Please email me at shemapodcastshow@gmail.com. Yes, add show at the end. Someone else took shemapodcast@gmail.com, strange enough. So again, shemapodcastshow@gmail.com, or join our growing and vibrant WhatsApp community by clicking the link in the show notes. So Rabbi Pill, thank you so much for being here with us once again.
I'm so glad to be back after missing last month. I was thankfully in Israel, so I think I had a decent excuse, but I was sad to have had to sit that one out. I think you did a fantastic job solo, though.
I shared this with the audience that it was so poetically perfect because, as you, I now realize, experienced with me, they cut our power off that Friday. And in this room, since I'm doing a lot of videos now, I need to be video ready for work. And I like to eventually turn this into video podcast, is that when you're doing video, even though these blinds are closed, all the little light that comes through the sides, it's just like it's magnified in the camera. And it's just like a bright light behind you. So I had to put blackout on them, which is sort of pressing. So I like being able to have some sunlight too.
I was wondering, because as I sat down here, I was like, oh, is it dark outside? Wow, okay.
So I had to do it. I had to make a trade-off decision. And I'll tell you, when I was in here doing that podcast by myself in total darkness, we had no electricity, there's no sunlight. I'm here with a flashlight, setting up my mic, looking at my notes. And as I was talking about the month of Teves, I was like, it was very poetic and very appropriate. Sitting in darkness by yourself, looking for how Hashem orchestrated this moment for a reason. But it's good to be back here with the lights on and with you in the room. So we can have a back and forth, and I can learn from you for this month of Shevat.
Let's do it.
So, we were just talking about all the different aspects of the month. One of the things that Rabbi Pill and I were discussing is that, we typically have all these different symbols and signs. We have the zodiac, we have the letter, we have the body part, and they all have this messaging, but really they're all pointing to the same message, the same underlying theme. And, I think as the years go on, the episodes go on, we'll be able to dig deeper into a different area of this, but they're also pointing and highlighting a central theme. But I want to start here, like I asked you to the last time we were together for Kislev, Rabbi, because, I don't know if you noticed this, but on the iPhone, the new operating system, if you play music now, that instead of it going from one song to the next song to the next song, it like DJs them. It mixes them together. So one song sort of blends into the next song. Yeah, so last month, I listened to music in the morning when I work out, and I noticed that feature, and I was like, it's exactly how Hashem did the months. It's not like, boom, Tevis is over. Boom, Shevat begins. It's like they're all DJ'd together. They all like intertwine in this flow together. So maybe you can help us start with this idea of how Tevis sort of flows into Shevat and how we can sort of see what the evolution or the changeover. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit, and then we'll sort of delve into the month itself.
Sure. That's a great segue. So I in a very, very, very briefly, I really think that Shevat now is taking this sort of energy of Teves, which you talked about, is kind of sort of, trying to find the meaning in the blackout, so to speak, and is really sort of throwing it at us in a variety of different ways. But when it comes to Shevat in particular, I think the blackout or the darkness that we're engaging here and we're finding meaning in is the general picture of the material world that we're encountering. That in and of itself can create a lot of darkness, even and especially when that world is good and that world is positive, can create a lot of darkness in the sense that when the world is good and impressive and going right, so to speak, it can really lead us to sort of miss what's going on beneath the surface. And in that sense, it's darkening the really important thing. So it's not that things are negative, and that is also a sort of darkness, and we've talked about that. But even when things are positive, when we're experiencing the world positively, when we're experiencing enjoyment and pleasure, and we're engaging the world in enjoyable kinds of ways. We'll talk about, how halfway through the month we have the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, and, we look at a tree, and the tree is great, and the tree is cool, and the tree is beautiful, and so on and so forth. But if we're not paying attention, we can focus too much on the tree and not realize what's going on beneath the surface of the tree that is not apparent to us. So really, I think a lot of the energy of Shevat, and this relates again to the way the Sefer Yetzirah, which is kind of a lot of the model that we've been talking about, sort of relates the energy of Shevat. It's expressed in the letter Tzadik. It's expressed in the month of Shevat. It's expressed in the zodiac sign of the Aquarius or the Dili, the water drawer or the bucket. It's expressed in the physical faculty of swallowing, of a sort of of taking food and absorbing that food into ourselves. And all of these are kind of expressing or trying to get us to appreciate and engage with a similar kind of spiritual work, which is not to get too wrapped up in what we see on the surface, but try and focus on what's going on beneath the surface and what's inside, what appears to us on the outside.
Perfect. Well, let's start with the letter. I'll let you begin there because, with the Sadi, we have it's one of the letters, but there's a lot we can learn from the shape of this letter. Maybe we can start there. You can discuss that, create some imagery around this idea of the Tzaddik, which is all this is pointing to, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So the Gemara points out to us, and this is true about certain other letters as well, but the Gemara points out to us that, of course, the Tzaddik takes two forms, right? There's a straight form and there's a bent over form, right? There's the form of the tzaddik that the final letter, when the letter tzaddik is found at the end of a word, it takes this like sort of straight, elongated form that points straight down. And when the tzaddik is found in the middle of the word, you kind of, the bottom sort of third of the tzaddik kind of folds upward and creates kind of a base for the tzaddik. And so there's what's called a tzaddik kafufa and a tzaddik zakufa, a bent over tzaddik and a standing straight, upright tzaddik. Both of them, however, the Gemara says, the Talmud tells us, the letter tzaddik itself, like the name of the letter, sort of points us to the idea of a tzaddik, of a righteous person. And that's really, and so the energy that's creating the month of Shevat is also the same energy, the same expression of godliness that's creating the letter tzaddik. The letter tzaddik is the letter that sits at the root of what a tzaddik really is. And so the month of Shevat also is sort of an invitation for us to engage that idea of tzaddik. Tzaddik is not also, I think it's important to point out, tzaddik is not only something that is sort of this lofty ideal, and there are these tzaddikim, there are these righteous people, holy people out there, and sort of we're down here and they're up there, and we have this kind of hierarchical relationship with tzaddikim. But the Baal Shem Tov and many others point out that every person, of course, has an aspect of tzaddik within themselves, and what we're trying to do in the month of Shevat is really to try and access that, or Shevat invites us to try and access that and engage with that aspect of what a tzaddik really is.
Okay, well, let's start then with defining what a tzaddik really is.
That's wow. Okay, so that's obviously a big question. I wanna try to maybe it's a little bit of a cheat, but I want to define it in the negative by contrasting it with something that it's not, but that we often confuse it with. So I think that we find, and this is particularly true if you go back, a couple of hundred years to like the big historical Jewish debates between the Hasidic movement and what was called back then, the Misnagdic movement. Misnagdim really just mean those who are opposed. You had the new Hasidic movement, which originated in the mid 1700s with the Baal Shem Tov, and really begins to take form in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. And you have those who opposed that movement, oftentimes attributed to the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, who was sort of a towering scholar, a towering Kabbalist, very, very, very massive and huge personality, and was really the progenitor of what today in the Jewish world we would refer to as the yeshiva world, so to speak, where Torah study and learning Torah, whether full-time or on a consistent basis, part-time, is sort of the primary role of the Jew. This is what you're here to do. You're here to learn Torah. The Hasidim had different ideas about what the primary role of a Jew is here to do, or why we're here. Of course, you have to learn Torah because you can't do the other things without having the basis in sort of the guidebook, which is what Torah is. But we're not here to just sit in Torah. We're here really ultimately to use Torah as a tool to help us become more godly and more connected to God. We become connected to God through becoming godly ourselves.
I don't think anyone would argue that that's not the goal of learning Torah. It just can get lost sometimes. Or would you disagree with that? I think there's a school of thought that that's not the goal of learning Torah, because everything I've always learned is that learning Torah lo lishma, not for the sake of heaven, even for selfish reasons, because eventually it will change you and make you learn it simply for heaven, which is all the ultimate goal.
I think there are those who would disagree with me. I would agree with you personally. I think there are those who would say no, they're actually. But I would say that there's a difference in sort of focus and a difference in opinion and how that comes about. The Hasidim, early Hasidim, definitely took the view that connecting with God, becoming connected to and aligned with and attached to God through the development of your own godliness is an active, intentional process. It requires work and intentional work. And I think the early Misnagdim would have taken the position that it happens on its own. The work is in Torah. And if you learn Torah, the other stuff happens. You don't work on the other stuff, because working on the other stuff takes you away from Torah. So Torah is the ultimate. Torah is the thing you're supposed to work on. Torah is the only place really where you connect to God. That's how you connect to God. You connect to God through Torah itself, and Torah changes you. And we see this. I think we see echoes of that idea in the contemporary Jewish world, or the contemporary, very tiny, but to us very giant world of, internal Orthodox politics and insider baseball, so to speak. But there's certainly a world of Jewish thought that says that Torah transforms people by default. All you have to do is sit in yeshiva and study Torah, and you'll be a different person. And then there's a school of thought that says, no, not at all. You can sit in yeshiva and study Torah, and Torah can do good things to you, or Torah can do bad things to you. It depends what the ground is that Torah is fertilizing. That means you have to make certain ground for Torah to fertilize. And if bad comes in, the bad gets emphasized and multiplied through Torah, because Torah gives it strength. Torah can be, the Gemara says, Torah can be a sam hachaim or sam hamaves, an elixir of life or an elixir of death, depending on what you're feeding it to. So these are two different views.
It can lead to arrogance. I mean,
certainly it can lead to arrogance. We've seen, sadly, again, I don't want to turn this into kind of a politics discussion, but we see, sadly, Torah can be used as a tool for control, a tool for arrogance, a tool of power. Those who know hold power over those who don't know, and as opposed to viewing their role as sharing and democratizing Jewish knowledge, they might see their role as gatekeeping the correctness of Jewish knowledge and things like that. There are different ways, I think. There are many ways that Torah can do bad things to people.
Right, which I think everything you just said is actually not off track at all, or negative, because what you're doing is having that part of the conversation is going to draw a distinction between that and a tzaddik and the things that we were discussing, like the zodiac. So
right. So let's jump back to the idea of the tzaddik.
What is a tzaddik now that we decide what it's not?
Right. So really, ultimately, I think what a tzaddik really, really is a kind of person who transforms all of their worldly, material experience of everything that this life has to offer into an experience and a source of connection and attachment with God. And so that's why I started off by sort of trying to draw the contrast, because the ideal in the misnagdic world, in the idea of a tzaddik is not really, we don't really, we even today, if you go to the world that is sort of the heirs of the old misnagdic world, thank God, the tensions have cooled. For many, many generations, the tensions between Hasidim and Misnagdim have cooled. And the conflict, which once upon a time, 200 years ago, led to book burnings of each other's books and things like that, bans and excommunications and things like that, these tensions are cooled. By and large, we all get along, although we have different schools of thought about what we should be focusing on. But by and large, we all get along. And that's fantastic and great. But you do see that in the Misnagdic world, for example, the Jewish ideal is typically like the Gadol or the Talmud Chacham, right? Meaning the towering scholar who spends all their time studying Torah and really ideally retreats from the world into the world of the Beit Medrash, into the world of the study hall, into the world of the yeshiva, and just immerses themselves day and night 100% in sort of what we call the Daled Amos Shel Halacha, the 4 cubits, the 4 walls of Torah, formally speaking, right? The Torah books, Torah texts, Torah study, etc. And that's one ideal. That's one ideal. The ideal of the tzaddik is not that. The ideal of the tzaddik, or the concept of a tzaddik, is really somebody who is much more outgoing, much more fully engaged with the world outside of them, outside of the 4 walls of the Beit Medrash, outside of the 4 walls of the yeshiva. This is someone who is grounded intensely and deeply in Torah, but takes that and then goes out and has a full range of worldly experience. And actually their role is to show us and demonstrate to us how everything in the world, not just Torah, contrast to the materiality of the world, but all the materiality of the world is also godly, and we can connect to God through all of those things as well. And that's not a compromise, but that's an ideal. God, specifically, the Medrash tells us that God creates a world in order to exist within sort of lower places, so to speak. Meaning, there's a sense in which if creation is a dramatic magic trick, it's one thing for the magician, the ultimate magician, to say, I'm perfect, and here I am in the perfection of Torah. But it's a much more dramatic and impressive trick for the magician to come along and say, I'm perfect, and here I am even in imperfection. I am ultimately spiritual, and here I am not only in spirituality and Torah, but also in materiality, in all of the material things, in food and drink and clothing and in nice cars and big houses and all of the materiality of the world. And that's why you find actually in the Hasidic world, and some people criticize this, but I think it's a misplaced criticism. It can be a correctly placed criticism, but at its root, it's a misplaced criticism. You see in the Hasidic world, many leaders within the Hasidic world, or many tzaddikim, sort of are deeply engaged with the material world. Not all. Everyone has a sense of sort of where their work is supposed to be. But you see many, and historically this has been true, many Hasidic rebbes and things like that who are, very connected to wealth, very connected to nice things, tables set with lots of silver and, nice clothes, traditional clothes, but well-made, fancy clothes and expensive hats and things like this. And you wonder, this is the ideal? Well, it depends what you're doing there. Are you engaging these things from a material perspective, or are you specifically engaging these things to demonstrate, reveal, and experience the godliness contained within, quote unquote, the darkest and lowest, most material places? So that really, in a strong sense, that's the role of a tzaddik. That's what a tzaddik is. A tzaddik is a person, as the verse in Mishlei in Proverbs tells us, tzaddik ochel l'sova nafsho. A tzaddik eats to satiate their soul. The tzaddik doesn't not eat. The tzaddik eats, and the tzaddik eats well, but not to enjoy the steak, and not to enjoy the cake, and not to enjoy the whiskey. The tzaddik eats to satisfy their soul, meaning everything that they eat and everything that they engage is an experience of the godliness contained within that thing. That's really what a tzaddik is all about.
As you were talking, which was so beautifully said, the entire time our forefather that was just glaring in my mind that you were describing is Yosef, who is part of the Sephiros, Yesod, which we discussed that in depth with Rabbi Mizell. He went down into exile. He managed the material needs of not only his family, but the entire world. He lived in abundance. We bless our sons to be like his sons, Menashe and Ephraim, because they were able to remain tzaddiks even in the material world of Egypt.
This is connected also actually to the letter form of a tzaddik. If the form of the letter tzaddik is actually composed of two letters, like many other letters, they're sort of the basic building blocks of the basic sort of graphical building blocks of the Hebrew letters, certain shapes and things like that. And the letter tzaddik is really composed of two letters. It's composed of the letter nun and the letter yud. You attach them to each other, and it forms a tzaddik. And the letter nun is associated typically with Moshe. The letter yud is very much associated with Yosef. And so, and really, it's the letter tzaddik as a whole is sort of the marrying of this personality of Yosef and this personality of Moshe, this deeply sort of material leader, and the leader of the material well-being of Egypt at the time, and the spiritual leader of Moshe. You put them together, and you get tzaddik.
Right, and the yud is on the back of the nun, which I was thinking the whole time, like we have a kollel here, and we have people that dedicate their life to staying in the base midrash and learning. However, one of their primary responsibilities is to make themselves available to teach the rest of us. And it's sort of the same idea, that it's sort of like these different roles, but all sort of feeding the collective nature of this. I love that. The yud riding on the back of the nun.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that's what a tzaddik, and that's what the inner tzaddik within all of us is really primarily about. It's about our ability to sort of look at and encounter the material world, and this can be a dangerous thing. I don't want to. We shouldn't treat it flippantly. There's very, very good reason why very many movements within Judaism and very many ideologies within Judaism and philosophies of Judaism and particular individuals, even within Hasidic and more spiritual ideologies that are comfortable with materialism, why they are afraid of materialism, because it can be very deceiving. But but to each person and wherever they are and at whatever place they're capable of handling, the avoda, the spiritual work of the tzaddik, and therefore also the spiritual work of the month of Shevat, becomes, in a certain sense, to encounter materiality, to encounter the physical, and to identify what's beneath the surface. The physical is carrying something. This is the deli, this is the Aquarius, the bucket of water. The purpose of the bucket is not the bucket. The purpose of the bucket is the water inside of the bucket. But you encounter the bucket and you see a bucket. If you don't, and if you get focused on the bucket, you miss the purpose of the bucket, and you miss what's really going on. No one cares about the bucket. If there was a way to carry water without a bucket, that would be great. But we need the bucket to carry the water. Godliness, so to speak, needs a material form in order to express itself within a material world in a way that's graspable to material creatures. But the material form is not the important part.
Right. Except for the idea that the bucket, the material, is what transports what's inside of it from where it was to where it needs to be.
So it's right. So meaning that's an even higher level, really. And actually, that's an even, I would say, even higher level. It's one thing to get stuck on the materiality of the bucket. Then you can move from all I see is the bucket, all I see is the tree, all I see is the food. I can move beyond that and see, oh no, the bucket's not important, the tree is a nothing, and the food means nothing. The tree is just dust. The food is just dust in my mouth. What's really important is the godliness inside of it, the water inside of the bucket, the fruit that is not yet on the tree, but the potential is there and it's going to be on the tree. That's what the tree is really all about. What's the food? The food is just carrying God energy into my body to give me life, and so on and so forth. But then there's an even higher level, which is then to realize, now that I realize that the bucket has water in it and the tree has fruit, or will have fruit, or contains the potential for fruit, and food is transporting God's shefa, God's energy and bounty to me, that means that the bucket's really important. And the tree is really important, and the food is really important in and of themselves. In Kabbalistic language, it's the realization that kalim, that vessels are also oros, are also light. Vessels are not just things that, material things that contain light, but the light's the important thing. But really the kalim also are light, because all their entire function is a God-intended function to convey light through their materiality.
Which is the whole idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, being the greatest of all men, but being the most humble. And when you get to the point where you need to be, it seems like you almost don't exist. Like in some degree, but that's how you become who you are, by totally negating the ego, which I guess is maybe who we think we are, but we're actually not. And Moshe Rabbeinu was able to totally remove that and carry the weight of the needs of everyone else, which eliminated his own needs. His whole purpose was to carry the water, carry the Torah, carry the wisdom of Hashem and guidance and support, materially, spiritually, whatever it was, for everyone else. And the other thing I read, and I'll let you sort of patch all this random ideas together that are running through my head, but I also read that in the month of Shevat, that this is the month that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying the words Devarim, the final book of the Torah, to the Jewish people. Can you stitch all that together in a coherent way for all of us? Sure.
So we know. So Moshe dies on the 7th of Adar, which is he gives this sort of 40-day speech that begins at the beginning of Shevat and continues until his death. 40 days later, at the end of the first week of Adar. And this speech, which is really the book of Devarim, which the Medrash and the Talmud call a Mishnah Torah, a repetition of the Torah, right? Sefer Devarim, the book of Devarim, consists largely of sort of a recap and a retelling of everything that has happened since the Exodus, which we're reading about now, but everything that has happened and the laws that were given and sort of re-explaining those laws, and in many cases in slightly different ways and so on and so forth. But really, in a certain sense, what Moshe is conveying in this sort of final, grand, very, very long speech is he's conveying the orality of the Torah, right? He's giving over orally. Of course, his speech becomes text, right? His speech is validated by God and says, no, this is going to be in the book, right? It becomes part. But really what Moshe is doing is you've received the text. There are different opinions among commentators of the Torah about how exactly the text of the Torah is written. Is it written piecemeal? Is it all written at once? The Jews have received the textual version of everything already, right? God speaks to Moshe, and Moshe conveys that speech to the people, and now they have those words that God wants conveyed to them. Now Moshe is using his words. he's essentially engaging in what we know of as oral Torah, really. And the oral Torah is really the soul behind the written Torah. It's the thing that the written Torah is trying to carry. You can't. It's like the written Torah becomes the bucket, and the oral Torah becomes the water within the bucket. That you can't convey the fullness of the oral Torah. The oral Torah contains everything that will ever be thought and everything that will ever be said and questioned and innovated and made up and commented on for all time about God's Torah is the oral Torah. And you can't communicate all that in a book. You have a substantial library here. You can go to someone's Jewish library. Every book in that library is oral Torah, except for one thin volume, which is the Chumash, right? But all of that is oral Torah. You can't put that in a book.
And really, it sounds like the fifth book, Devarim, is oral Torah to some degree.
Right. I mean, it's oral Torah that then becomes written Torah, but that's the story of all of Judaism, right? The story of all of Jewish history is constantly oral Torah, then becoming, so to speak, written Torah. Right? The Talmud is oral Torah that has become written. The Shulchan Aruch is the development of the Talmud that then becomes fixed in writing. And that's our constant story. But the purpose of the writing is to carry and convey the much deeper, more expansive, more nuanced, more multifaceted oral truth that's behind that writing. And so that's what Moshe is doing now in the month of Shevat, is carrying the water, right? He's giving us access to the water that's within the bucket. You have the bucket already. You received that at Har Sinai. You received that at Mount Sinai. You have the text. You have the written Torah. Now I'm giving you the oral Torah. That's the water inside of the bucket. That's the spirituality, the much more expansive, inchoate, intangible thing. Right? The words we speak, as soon as they leave our mouths, they disappear. But the thing I put on a piece of paper, that's indelible. That stays there forever. So the oral Torah is this spiritual essence that is contained behind the materiality of a written Torah. And that's being conveyed now by Moshe, who really is an ideal receptacle for this. Why? Because he is a physical receptacle that doesn't view himself as distinct from the light that he's carrying. And that's the important part of this relationship between materiality and spirituality that Shevat is trying to convey, that a tzaddik is really focused on, is to sort of break down that barrier between spirituality and materiality and view the material as spiritual. Moshe views himself as just a tool, a kli, a vessel for the expression of godliness into the world. And he's such a good one because he's anav ma'od, he's humble. He doesn't view himself as anything other than just a pipeline for God to express God's self out there into the world.
He's a water carrier.
He's a water carrier. He's a bucket. He's a bucket, yeah, exactly so.
The simplicity and the purity of that analogy or that metaphor, which is so accurate, makes life seem so much more simple when you view it from that way. Of course, we have a Yetzer Hara and an ego that interferes with the pristine simplicity of it all. What you just said was so profound. I don't want to just gloss over it because you really help clarify to a large degree the essence of Torah, the distinction and necessity of written and oral, because we obviously needed the Torah that came directly from Hashem to make sure that throughout time that any oral Torah always stayed congruent with that. But in the end, the essence of Torah, which always is equated with water, is for the human being to be a kli and carry it from one person to the next, which is the oral Torah, as you just said. A very profound idea.
And to the extent that we're able to do, in our little way, right? Again, the Baal Shem, we talked about this, we mentioned this already, but we all have this little bit of tzaddik inside of us, or this aspect of tzaddik inside of us. The Baal Shem Tov says explicitly, we all have an aspect of Moshe inside of us, based on a passage in the Zohar. To the extent that we're able to access that part of ourselves where we sort of can abstract away from our own ego and our own sense of material self, to just be to just be buckets, right? To just be water carriers, to just be pipelines for the continued expression of oral Torah. We become good stewards of oral Torah. And that doesn't mean that the oral Torah we're putting out there into the world is the same as what came into us, right? It's different, right? We are all here to develop Torah more. We all have a unique aspect within Torah, and our role here is to access that unique aspect. We all have a unique chelek in Torah. We all, at Har Sinai, the Medrash says, The 600,000 people are there, and each one of their souls corresponds to one of the 600,000 letters in the Torah. We each have a letter. We each have a mitzvah that we're connected to. And we're here to bring that out. But to the extent we do so in a way that abstracts, and so we're going to do it something new. We're going to bring out new Torah that hasn't been here before, because there's been no me before. There's been no one expounding Torah before me or before you or before anyone else who engages with Torah and then expresses and communicates and passes that Torah that they along to someone to further down the line. How good that oral Torah coming out of the pipe is depends on how much the pipe views itself as me, or how much that pipe views itself as just a pipe for the water. And if I'm just a pipe for the water, then the ego doesn't play a role in the development, or plays less of a role in the development of that Torah. There's a sense of I, because the total negation of I means that God put me here, not nobody. He put me here with my personality and my experiences and my outlook. That's why I'm here. But it's not me. It's that all of those aspects of myself are just a unique filter for more Torah to get put out there that hasn't been put out there yet.
Right. It's not negating your sense of self-worth. It's enhancing it, because you realize I am Hashem's kli.
Exactly so. Exactly. There has to be an I in order for that to be true. There has to be an I for that.
Exactly. But when you see that in your...
But the nature of that I is just a kli.
Okay, so to me this month, to get down to some practical, what is the avoda of this month? It is how to develop this within us. And it's about us each individually developing this proper vessel, which, as we sort of alluded to already, manifests itself in totally unique different ways throughout different people throughout Klei Yisrael. Like I mentioned, the people in the Kollel who just learn all day, but they also serve the role of teaching those of us engaged in the business world, because we have that role of carrying it out in our actions in the way we interact with not only the Jewish world, but the non-Jewish world. And there's an idea here that I think we can touch on now, is that we do have a holiday this month, Tu B'Shevat, the New Year of the trees. And the Torah talks about the tree is like a man. There's a lot always beneath the surface. And a lot of the avoda, I think, this month is developing what is beneath the surface, as you sort of touched on already. But can you elaborate on those ideas more? Maybe we can sort of bring this through to some more like real practical actions on, what we should be focusing on ourselves this month. Sure.
So like you said, I'm Tu B'Shvat, which is in the Talmud, Tu B'Shvat is the day on which it's tax day for the fruit tithes, really. Right? I mean, I have to bring tithes. I have to bring Meiser and Truma, so on, for different gifts that I'm not allowed to eat. I give it to the Kohen, I give it to the Levi, I eat it in Jerusalem. And Tu B'Shvat is end of fiscal year for these fruits, right? So each year I have to tithe my produce, right? So where does the year end? What was last year's produce that I have to tithe, and what's next year's produce do I have to tithe? Because I have to take a percentage of the year's produce. So what's the produce that I have to take that percentage from? So the Talmud designates, it's a dispute between Hillel and Shammai, but the Talmud designates Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat, as the day for that. Now, why? Because there's nothing on the tree in Tu B'Shvat, right? You don't want to set tax day. You don't want to set end of fiscal year on a day when there's going to be fruit on the tree, and now you have to keep track of, that fruit was on the tree before the 15th, so that counts for last year's fruit, and now any new fruit that sprouts, a day later is now. No, you want to set this day during a period when there's nothing on the tree. So we specifically, in order to, and really what that means is, in order to, or what that signifies in a certain sense, is in order to sort of properly appreciate the fruit and properly relate to the fruit, we really have to take stock of the fruit when there's no fruit around. In order to appreciate what's there, you have to look at it when it's not really there, when it's only below the surface. And the tree is going to fruit soon. It's a couple months away, right? But come Nisan, there's going to be blossoms on the trees, and the fruit's going to start coming. Now everything is fallow. And so what that really invites us to appreciate is there has been fruit on the tree. There's going to be fruit on the tree. And the fact that I don't see anything on the outside right now is not really important. It's there. It's there. It has been there. It's going to be there. But the absence of that overwhelm of the senses of the fruit is here allows me to take stock of the fruit. As sort of we can apply this, if we take this idea and we can apply it also to people, right? As you said, Torah says that ki adam eitz hasadeh, right? It compares that, it says that because man is a tree in the field. There's a lot of connection between the human being and the tree. There are a lot of differences between human beings and trees also, but there's a lot of commonality. And one of the obvious ones here, of course, is what lies below the surface and what lies underneath is far, far more important than what appears on the outside. The potentiality is critical. That's what we really want to focus on, what's below the surface, what you don't see obviously on the surface. Human beings are very deceptive. What you see on the surface is not necessarily what's really going on the inside. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us that the ideal person is the ideal student of Torah, the ideal Torah personality, going back to what we said before, right? Who are the right people to convey and communicate and pass on Torah? Are people who have toho kaboro, who their insides match their outsides and their outsides match their insides. That's an ideal person. Why? Because that's a person who isn't bound up with ego and puffery, and I have to present myself a certain way because I need to be seen a certain way. I am what I am, and I am who I am, and whatever my inside is, it expresses outward, and I don't express outward anything more than what's on the inside. I don't pretend that I'm something that I'm not. That's a person who has sort of abstracted away from their sense of egotistical self, and is just who they are. I am who I am. There's an I. But what the nature of that I is whatever God made it, and it doesn't have to be anything more or anything less than what that is. And so the tree really the tree specifically at this time really calls us to focus and appreciate that.
One of the things I discussed for last month's podcast is how plants that are watered regularly don't hold up during a Houston hurricane the way plants that have to fight a little more for water by digging their roots down deeper, which is part of the month of Teves, was looking deeper and deeper because it's building roots for ourselves. And that sort of ties in with what we're talking about here, because you can have a tree that looks beautiful, but it can blow over very quickly, meaning on the exterior and the
shallow roots.
Yeah, but it can be shallow. And the roots are really what's important, that by strength and produce the ongoing fruit. With that analogy of the tree, how would you, I guess we'll bring it back to when you were discussing the zodiac and differentiating between someone who was just a knowledgeable of Torah. How would you bridge that
So
analogy?
I would say it's more than the actions. It's more than the actions, because really it's about the perspective or the internal perspective of how actions are being taken. Actions are external. Actions are externalized. As the Gemara and as the Shulchan Aruch tells us, Echad hamamed ve'echad hamarbeh ubilvad sheyichav libo l'shemayim. Whether you do a lot or whether you do a little, the important thing is the perspective, the attitude of you should be aligned with God. You should be aligning your heart with God. And whether I do a lot, whether I do a little, the main focus is, or the really important thing. Now, again, there are things you have to do and there are things you cannot do, right? I don't want to diminish from that. But everyone finds themselves in different places, and our actions, our externalizations of self probably ought to look different from each other. They will look different from each other, whether they should or they shouldn't. But what is common is that whether my actions, whether I have big branches and giant fruit, or whether I have very small branches and no fruit, whatever kind of tree I happen to be, however the tree appears on the outside, whatever the actions of the tree look like, the core focus ought to be the perspective and the focus of what it is, whatever it is that I'm doing is, and this is the avoda, this is the work of the tzaddik, is that I'm experiencing, my perspective is such that the actions that I'm engaged in, the things that I'm engaged in, are experienced in a certain way. And that way is, I'm always focused on what's going on beneath the surface. I'm always focused on what is the spiritual essence, what's the spiritual truth within this physical act. Whether I spend 2 hours praying in the morning or I spend 15 minutes praying in the morning. What's the quality of that prayer?
What's the intent?
What's the intent? Exactly.
It also seems that the sort of the bedrock of being a Jew, of emunah and bitachon, are the roots. Because in the end, when times get challenging and Hashem puts different tests on us, that's what's going to keep us grounded.
Yeah, and that's exactly what emunah and bitachon really are, which is the ability to look beyond the way things appear at the moment on the surface, and to say, I trust in something deeper and bigger. There's something bigger going on here, and bitachon, and therefore I'm okay. I'm secure.
Yeah, I think the fact that my learning, because I didn't have any rabbinic guidance early on for the first few years, I was pretty much reading like Rabbi Roosh books. It's not a bad foundation before I began, studying Shulchan Aruch and things of that nature, because that seems a large part of what this is that becomes a bedrock for us.
There are definitely places to start that could have set you off on a much worse foot. That's for sure.
So one of the things I read about, which ties into this, is that the idea of the 613 mitzvos becomes, seems very overwhelming. I mean, when I was reading this, it really helped me out a lot, because I think the more I've been living here trying to be an observant Jew, the more and of course I have a Yetzer Hara that's probably using all this to his advantage. But, I pulled a thread out of my suit when it was sitting in my closet on Shabbos. Oh my gosh, I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, that's totally forbidden. And I can see myself getting trapped in this, like, constant beating up on yourself. And then I was reading this, and it was just like, it was talking about, like, that's not the right attitude. Like, finding one mitzvah, learning how to do, develop that. Maybe that's part of the avoda this month too, is just finding one thing that you really will try to perfect. Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah. So I want to be, I guess, careful about how to approach this, because I don't want anything to sort of suggest that all 613 are not important at any given moment. They are all important all the time, right? At any given moment, they're all in play, right? Even on a Sunday morning, Shabbos is still in play, because it's a day after Shabbos and it's 6 days before Shabbos, and it's still and that's part of what it means to keep Shabbos and make Shabbos special, is that even on Sunday, Shabbos is still in play, right? So everything is always in play. And nothing we say about this, I think, should diminish the sense in which whatever somebody is halachically obligated to do. We all have different sets of halachic obligations, but whatever someone, those are there. Those are there. At the same time, being very, very focused on that is to get wrapped up in the externalities of things, the external appearance of things. The Zohar itself tells us, it's a very, very important passage in the Zohar itself tells us that the mitzvos, the 613 mitzvos, are what the Zohar calls gufei Torah, the body of Torah. In other words, it's the material stuff of Torah. And behind and within the body of Torah, like in a human body, there's a soul, the soul of Torah. And the Zohar cautions getting too exclusively focused on the body, so that you forget that there's a soul there operating as well. Now, there's also a big danger in getting too focused on the soul, and then you stop paying attention to the body. That's also a big problem. But to the extent, and which one we need to, worry about depends, I guess, on, where we are at any given moment. But if we find ourselves in a place in which if you're tearing your hair out over the possibility that you might have pulled a thread out of your suit on a Shabbos morning, then probably it's good to focus on the other thing at that moment, rather than lean into that thing. Right. That's a good time to focus on the soul of Torah rather than the body of Torah.
Right.
And when you find yourself then focused back on the soul of Torah, then it will create space to then focus more on the body, and you jump back and forth and back and forth.
It's sort of an oscillating.
It's oscillating, right? And you jump back and forth faster and faster and faster and more swiftly and more easily until you sort of integrate and synthesize both of them all at the same time. We should all be so lucky to achieve that, particularly in the context of Shevat, where Shevat is sort of urging us to the avoda of the tzaddik, and the avoda of the tzaddik is to look beyond external materiality and see the soul within that materiality. So it's appropriate to think a little bit, I think, certainly in terms of not just how many boxes am I checking on the 613 mitzvah checklist, but again, whether I'm doing a lot or whether I'm doing a little, how am I doing it? With what perspective am I doing it? Am I doing it intentionally, or am I not doing it intentionally? And it's probably a good place and a good time to kind of engage that sort of thinking. And I think it's also, important and worthwhile to appreciate that we say this about Torah. And again, we've already, I think, explained and talked about how Torah becomes a model for this, bigger picture of the relationship between externality and internality. We say this about Torah. The Gemara says, "Ein adam lomed ela mimakom shalibo chafetz ba." A person can't learn except from a place within Torah that they want to be there. Meaning, do you have to learn all of Torah? Yeah, you got to learn all of Torah. Should you learn all of Torah right now? No, that's not a good idea. Because if I shove the parts of Torah down your throat that you don't want to be engaged with, what does it do? It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. If you engage the parts of Torah that you want to be studying, that you're interested in, that you're drawn to, mimakum, from that place, you'll get everywhere. Engaging with a mitzvah that one has an affinity towards, one is drawn to, and we all our souls come from different places. The Arizal describes how every soul's journey through this world, and we all make multiple journeys to achieve many different aspects of the larger configuration that our souls come from. But every soul's journey in this world is really here to achieve a certain thing or fix a certain thing or reveal a certain aspect of godliness within the world. And therefore is also specifically connected to a specific aspect of a specific mitzvah, like that we're going, and when we find ourselves with a natural draw or an affinity for a particular mitzvah, it can, doesn't always, but it can indicate that that's our work. That's our work. Now, God is indivisible, and God's will is indivisible, and that means that any specific mitzvah necessarily contains within it the entire Torah, conceptually. And so by engaging in one mitzvah, and by engaging in the mitzvah that we have a draw towards, again, a draw that's a proper draw, a draw that's a product of our own self-transcendence and not our ego, not our sense of self, not which mitzvah will make me look good to other people, or which mitzvah will people respect me for, or which mitzvah is easy for me, so I can give myself a pat on the back or something like that. But genuinely, which mitzvah do I have a draw towards? If we engage in that, from that, we can find ourselves an entry point into many, 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 many other things. But that's really an appreciation for what's going on within that mitzvah, for the internality of that mitzvah. On an external sense, it's just one mitzvah. Someone called me last week to ask me, it's still a month and a half away, but to ask me a Purim question. They live in a town that's right outside of Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem you read the Megillah, you celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar, and outside of Jerusalem you celebrate on the 14th of Adar, and this is a city that's really on the edges of Jerusalem. You can see the edges of Jerusalem from the city, but it's separated by a deep valley, and it's a separate municipality. He called me up to talk about which day is he supposed to celebrate Purim. Does it count as part of Jerusalem? Does it not count as part of Jerusalem? Is it a suburb of Jerusalem? Is it its own city, but in close proximity to Jerusalem? And part of the conversation came to, this person is very attached to the mitzvah of Purim. He really connects with it very, very deeply. So we all have those, I think, and many of us have more than one. But we all have mitzvahs we are particularly drawn to, and we all have mitzvahs that we are not necessarily particularly drawn to. Just because we're not drawn to it doesn't mean we're not obligated in it. But if we put our energy and focus on the mitzvahs that we're drawn to, not focused on the external of that mitzvah, but to appreciate that contained within that mitzvah that we're drawn to is a gateway to everything else. It's a connecting point to God, and if we're connecting ourselves to God, then by definition we're connecting ourselves to all of the other aspects of God's will and the Torah and all of other mitzvos. Then by appreciating the internality of the thing we're doing externally, we can also find ourselves a pathway and a gateway to connecting with everything else. So 613 is overwhelming and can be intense. And being nitpicky and particular about each one of the 613, and I have to do this one, and I have to do that one, I have to do it perfectly. This is a focus on externality without sort of a gentle appreciation for what's going on underneath the surface. We're focused on the bucket. But if we're focused on the water and we appreciate that the bucket is important because it gives us access to the water, so then we don't get so caught up in the buckets. And we don't get so, because we understand that the whole function of the bucket is to give us the water. The bucket is important because it gives us the water, but it's not important in and of itself outside of it giving us the water. And so engaging a particular mitzvah or getting OCD about a mitzvah or getting bent out of shape about, what did I do? Maybe I did that. You can make yourself crazy about these things. It's not a terrible thing, right? Again, you should care, right? If you care, you should care. At the same time, getting too caught up can really distract us from what we're really doing.
Right, exactly. So, Rabbi Pill, just to wrap things up, I would like to sort of take everything we've discussed and bring it to 3 points that if we want the listener, and I want myself to walk away from this episode with, as far as what my focus should be, what my avoda should be for the month of Shevat, how would you organize and list those 3 items?
So I would say, as an overarching focus, our work this month, our focus this month, floating in the background is the work of our own inner tzaddik, is the work of trying to appreciate that all of the materiality, all of the physical world we encounter and engage in and enjoy, there's something deeper going on below the surface. We're trying to focus on appreciating that there's always more than meets the eye. There's a spirituality, there's a spiritual beating heart, there's a godliness present within all of the physical experiences, external experiences, material actions, and so on, that we are encountering. That's the overarching, I think, orientation that we should focus on throughout the month. If we take that into sort of the practical realm, I think really we can apply this in 2 different respects. I think one is to apply it to our material lives, and the other is to apply it to our spiritual lives. In the spiritual sense, it's very valuable to appreciate that even when we're engaged in spirituality, in mitzvah observance, in Torah study, etc., what we are engaged in a worldly experience. Observing a mitzvah, following a rule, learning some Torah is nonetheless, despite the fact that it's a spiritual act, it's a mitzvah act, is nevertheless material. It's our body doing something in the material world. It's our mind studying a text of Torah. It's our hand tying on a pair of tefillin. Our cells lighting a Shabbos candle. Whatever it happens to be, it's a material experience. And that means that we need to try, during this month at least, to try and appreciate that there's something deeper going on here beyond this material experience. We can abstract away from it a little bit and appreciate that, number one, there's the totality of godliness that's present within this experience. Part of what that means is that we don't have to get so terribly caught up in OCD, right, and obsessive about whether we've done it exactly right or exactly perfectly, or what things we're not doing while we're doing this thing. Which mitzvahs am I observing and which mitzvahs am I falling short on? Focus on what we're doing and focus on the soul that's present within what you're doing. And that can give you hopefully access and comfort in the sense that you're accessing plenty in what you're doing in this moment. We can apply that, if we can apply that to spiritual things, all the more so we should apply that to sort of coarser material things. The Arizal and others write that part of the work of the month of Shevat is really associated with eating, and so I like eating. I like the spiritual work around eating. I'm partial to this, and so I think also that's a valuable place to do this. When we eat, we can try and appreciate that the material, physical experience we're having is a bucket holding something deeper and more spiritual. I'm not supposed to not enjoy my food. Being a spiritual person doesn't mean running away from a good steak or a milkshake. Not at the same time. It doesn't mean that I can't wear nice clothes or shouldn't wear nice clothes or shouldn't enjoy the house that I live in and the car that I drive and all of those other things. What it means is that I should live like a tzaddik, where the things that I enjoy and the things that I engage, the physical, material experiences that bring me enjoyment and pleasure and satisfaction as a human being, as a material, as a body, are things that are deeply spiritual experiences clothed in physicality. There's God here. There's godliness here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. and to appreciate that presence of God within the material things we engage in once a day, twice a day, once or twice a week, whatever a person can handle, and whatever sort of way a person can handle it. Some people are more sensitive to these things and they can sort of access it a little bit more easily. Some people are less sensitive to these things or more wrapped up in sort of, and we all know ourselves. Some people eat without thinking. It's very, very hard. Okay, but maybe when they get dressed in the morning, they can appreciate the clothes that they're putting on in a deeper way. So don't work on food, work on clothing, because that's the entry point. Just like for the 613 mitzvot, as we talked about, the entry point is in the places where I can have that entry point, that will help me build and expand outward. And so a person should try and find, I think, this month, the entry point for them, the place where they can benachas, as we say, in a sort of a gentle way, begin to identify spirituality, spiritual experience, godliness within our physical experience, and from there to expand outward.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.